And now, it's the Florida Spectacular podcast, hosted by Cathy Salustri. Find Cathy on Twitter and Instagram at Cathy Salustri, CathySalustri, on Facebook at Salustri Cathy, and visit her website, GreatFloridaRoadTrip.com. Now, discover a Florida you never knew existed.
Welcome back to the Florida Spectacular, the podcast that tells you all the best things about Florida. And I'm your host, Cathy Salustri. This week, we have two guests. One is a return guest, Andrew Furman, who we had you on the podcast, Andrew, to talk about your book, Bitten, your unexpected love affair with Florida. And at the end of that podcast, you and our producer, Chad Scott, who's here silently every week, started talking about gardening in Florida, because a lot of your book, Bitten, talks about your adventures in your landscape outside. And Chad is very active with the North. I'm going to get this. You don't have to tell me. The Northeast Native Plant Society. Is that right?
It's the Florida Native Plant Society, Ixia chapter, which is Northeast, Nassau County, Clay County, Duval County.
Perfect. So I just didn't know how to say it. And that is actually the name of a plant that's endemic to the Northeast area of Florida. So we started talking at the end of the podcast, and we were having so much fun. I said, why don't we all come back and do this and record it so other people can have the fun too? So that's what we're doing today. We're going to have fun talking about plants and native plants. And thank you both for being here.
My pleasure.
You're welcome.
So we all live in different areas of Florida. And I think, well, anybody who lives in Florida and has a hurricane warning bearing down on them and relatives in any other part of the country knows that to many people in the United States, there is no difference between Pensacola and Key West. And the reality is, if you were to get in a car and drive from Key West to Pensacola, it's roughly the same mileage as it would be to drive from Pensacola to Chicago. Which is to say that what grows in the northwest corner of Florida is not going to grow in Key West. And what grows in Chad's neighborhood is probably going to get burned in Andrew's. So let's give our listeners a little bit of a basis. I live in Gulfport, Florida, which is a coastal town just west and south of St. Petersburg in the Tampa Bay area. So I'm right on the 9-10 zone for growing things. Now, Andrew, you live on the southeast coast. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I live in Boca Raton, Florida. So first of all, it's so interesting to hear you describe that the distances, the Chicago to Pensacola. I mean, it's so fascinating, really. And it's true. But so I live down here in the southern part of the state. And a lot of my plantings actually do come from the Keys area. So, so it's a very different growing area than Chad's neck of the woods.
Sure. And what the Florida Native Plant Society recommends or preaches is right plant, right place. Even where I am in Nassau County, Amelia Island, I'm a block from the beach. So I get saltwater spray. If this were a low-lying area, I might get brackish inundation if I were on the marsh or the river. So not only do you have to consider north-south, where am I? Do I get occasional freezes, up by where I am? We'll get a handful, 8, 9, 10 nights in the 30s, an occasional freeze. Andrew's not getting any freezes down in Boca. And you have to think about the temperature zone, the climate zone, but also how close am I to the beach, to water, to potential inundation. And that's what makes Florida native plants so exciting. Within Florida, you go to Georgia, Georgia plants are Georgia plants. Florida plants, like you say, Pensacola, Key West, Nassau County, the Lake Wales Ridge, inland, outland, mangroves. There are so many different types of native plants for this incredible ecological diversity we have here that you can really and need to focus it to your specific area.
Well, and I mean, that is, there are microclimates and there are all these different areas. I always give the example of the Everglades. And people think about the Everglades. And when I say, well, there are actually 9 interconnected ecosystems. It's not just one big swamp. There's pine rockland, there's marsh, there's floodplain, there's all these things. And it really is such a diverse state. that I think it can be a little overwhelming for people who move to Florida and want to plant something. We bought our house 8 years ago, and we're 38 feet above sea level, but we're a mile from the beach. So it's a very interesting area. It was before Euro Americans arrived here. We know it was pine and palm scrub. Our neighborhood still actually has longleaf pines in it.
Wow.
Now, the woman who bought our house in 1996, we were given a stack of paperwork when we bought it, and she had started to do some landscaping. And of course, everybody wants these horrible green lawns, which my first order of business is, well, that's got to go. Turf grass has to go. But she had also tried to plant a pecan tree. And she had planted oak trees everywhere. Well, the oak trees are okay. They're not my favorite, but that's mostly because I have allergies. But the pecan tree never did very well. So we went back to zero. I think we left some cabbage palms because I'm a big fan of cabbage palms.
Yeah.
And we have one coconut palm. What do they call the coconut palms?
Coconut palms.
Coconut palms, but they don't grow up here, Andrew. The coconut palm, I could show you a picture. It's maybe 20 feet tall, if that. And the trunk is so at the top where you would normally in South Florida see that big green area that the coconuts grow. It's bent over. And the tree's surviving, but it's not doing well. So we of course brought in a landscaper, and we didn't do all native plants, but we did go for mostly xeric plants. Now we have some things in our yard that I wanted because I admit I am not quite as into native plants as some of the native plant people are. So we do have some citrus trees, which citrus are not native. And I planted 2 banana trees. And I made not the mistake. I planted a loofah plant because I wanted to grow loofah. And no one tells you when you grow loofah, you can't stop growing loofah. They just keep coming. They're not invasive. They don't spread, or at least this one hasn't. But if anybody needs an actual back loofah, I can hook you up. And I'll let you talk in a minute. The last thing I want to say about that is we went from having a pecan tree to I wanted a gumbo limbo. I love the look of a gumbo limbo tree. And so we planted one, got permission from the city because we wanted to put it on a right of way. And they said, well, you're on a brick street. We're never widening that. That's fine. And we planted it, and it just took a long time to take off. And now it's got a foothold. And we go down to the Keys, and my husband just looked at me and goes, is our gumbo limbo going to get that big? Because he says, I don't think we can let it get that big. It's on an alley in the street. And I said, no, it'll never get that big here. So, I mean, it works both ways. You can't have a pecan tree in my neighborhood because it gets too hot, but also it gets too cold for some of the things to really reach their South Florida potential. So in a way, we're in a sweet spot that neither of you are, because we can try and have a little of both, but nothing other than the natives are going to really flourish. What's in your landscape, Andrew?
Oh boy. We have tons of stuff here. One of the problems down where I am, it's probably a problem for you too, is that so many things can grow. So I think that one of my frustrations is that I think people, in some ways, it's the story of Florida. They've sort of created the Florida that they want to see in Florida rather than the that was here before they got here. But I've really sort of fallen in love with the Florida native plants as well. I've gotten a little less strict about it over the years, so I might be between to my temperament on native versus non-native, between both Chad and you, Cathy. But yeah, I started to. It's really when my attraction to the native plants came along with my interest in animals. So I was a bird watcher before I was a native plant gardener, and if you want more birds and butterflies, one way to do it is to plant the things that they want to see here.
For sure.
And so I really fell in love with firebush early on, which has nice, beautiful, almost like firecracker looking orange red blossoms that the hummingbirds, and it's amazing. One of the amazing things that I've discovered is that when you plant something, the animals find it. And so I tend to focus on those plants that like firebush, like beautyberry, which has amazing clusters of purple berries, and that the animals particularly appreciate.
Sure.
took off from there.
Yeah. And that's pretty much where I come at it with as well, Cathy. When I think about growing native plants, I'm not doing it for the plants. I'm growing insects because birds eat insects, and I'm trying to create a food chain here, right? I am trying to support biodiversity, and the building blocks are really the soil and the plants. Everything else comes from there. So in my landscape, I also have firebush, and there are a number of things that will grow throughout Florida. Black-eyed Susan is going to grow everywhere. Dune sunflower, for the most part, is going to grow everywhere. You've got your basics that will do everywhere, and then there are some really specified items that are not going to do well outside of their little bit of a zone. But I think what's great, and Cathy, where you started this from, is as long as you get that turf out of there, you can put down AstroTurf or rocks. Anything is better than turf grass, because
turf grass is evil.
Yeah,
it is the devil.
Yeah.
And for
grass,
lots of
turf grass requires more watering than any other crop in the United States. It requires more fertilizer, more pesticides are used on it. They're death zones. It might as well be blacktop, and it's in fact worse than blacktop, really, because of all the pesticides and fertilizers that most people use to maintain it, and then the exhaust that you're going to use when you mow it. So whether you are strictly native, and there are all kinds of resources for this. Getting back to your question, what's in your landscape and how is this? It's kind of confusing and overwhelming. Florida Native Plant Society online. The National Wildlife Federation has a great resource where you can put in your zip code and it will give you native plants. So fortunately, you're not in this alone. Don't go to Lowe's. Don't go to Home Depot. Don't even go to your local nursery. Chances are they have no idea what's native and what's not. But online, if this is something you care about, Florida Native Plant Society online and the National Wildlife Federation and other places have a lot of resources about what you can put into your landscape that will thrive.
I will jump in here and make a plug for something to replace St. Augustine grass, which I've really enjoyed, is sensitive plant or mimosa.
Yes.
Gorgeous. You have to make sure to get the native one, because there's a non-native that actually has spikes that you don't want to stand on. But the native mimosa is just beautiful, because it has these beautiful purple blossoms. And you can, if you want to mow it, you can mow it when it gets really out of hand, but you don't really have to mow it frequently. It's pretty low, and it really has a nice feel. It feels much better under your feet, I'll say that, than the St. Augustine grass does. So it's a beautiful alternative for people. There's one of the things we didn't mention. Chad listed all of the terrible things about Augustine grass, which is certainly true, but I think we don't pay attention to just the noise that it creates having mowers on all the time. I was thinking the time I was on the show, Cathy, and we had like a panic 5 minutes before I got on, because they heard a mower going off right next door. And listeners could sort of do a little experiment to sort of sit outside if they're in Florida, and how long it'll take before they hear some kind of mechanized noise go off. And so noise pollution is really one of my pet peeves lately. I try not to have too many pet peeves, but but that's definitely one of them, how much noise all this landscaping takes. And native plants, they just don't take as much mechanized noise.
Well, and you'll notice, Chad, you talked about you're building an ecosystem with your thing. All the things I have that are deliberately non-native are placed there to be a food or supply source for me. And I will say this about turf grass, because I was doing some research on the book that's going through edits with the University Press right now. And I was doing some research on Archbold Biological Station. And, Archbold is this amazing place in Venus, Florida, that they have scientists in every discipline working, and they have not just entomologists, they have people working specifically on ants and fire ants. And I read this report, and I just thought, if we really wanted to encourage people to plant natives, they need to buy an ad in the Tampa Bay Times, the Miami Herald, and publish this report, because it started like this. The bug guy got a call from a cattle rancher who told him that fire ants will not cross barbed wire fence. And this, of course, didn't sound right. So the entomologist went down there, and what he discovered, and then they did some research, and the whole paper publishes this, the cattle rancher had planted for his cattle right up to his fence line, regular grass for the cattle to graze. But on the exterior of the fence, it was native Florida grasses. And what was happening had nothing to do with the barbed wire. Fire ants, which might even be more hell on earth than turf grass. Fire ants can't survive and colonize in Florida native grasses. So if you don't have turf grass in your yard, you're not going to have fire ants. And yeah, I mean, if you've ever had a foot covered with fire ants, you know that they're pretty bad. Some people are highly allergic to them. So I read this and I went out and I looked at my yard and I thought about it and I said, you know what? I didn't think about this, but we don't have any fire ants. This is the first time I've lived somewhere in Florida where we didn't have fire ants, which of course are also an invasive species, and they wipe out other ant colonies. They're horrible. And I just thought, man, if we could tell every Floridian they don't have to spend money on insecticides, they don't have to kill these things, just rip out your grass and you won't have fire ants. We could solve the problem with water and fertilizer runoff. But I really don't like the invention of the lawn. I mean, we can go back to the history of it. It's a European invention. And lawns grew very nicely in Boston when we came over on whatever boats we came over on. But once you get down to Florida, there's nothing about our state that is tidy and orderly like that. We have more of a natural order.
And I see Arizona, New Mexico, California turning loose of the turf grass lawn a lot more readily than Florida is. Florida is really hanging on to that idea of the sprinklers on all day. I've got my poisonous Roundup in my hand. I'm sweating it out here mowing because I've got this middle class, middle American status symbol English box garden of everything's manicured and 90-degree angles and looks just so. And hey, I made it because I've got a turf lawn and a riding lawnmower and John Deere cap. And, we need to break free from that prison of this is what a lawn is supposed to look like, because there is a major national scale indoctrination in all of us that your lawn looks like this, and you've got your tractor, and you've got your pesticides, and you've got your irrigation, and that's how it's supposed to look.
Well, and
it means you're a respectable citizen, I think, is how it got translated. And that's one thing I never understood, is why we want this very special and scruffy kind of place, as Cathy was mentioning, why we really want it to look like everywhere else. Or imagine how amazing if it looked really coastal the way it actually is. It would be so much more, would seem more like we're in a touristy coastal.
It gives you such a greater sense of place, right? When you've got these native plants that look like instead of the same builder grade Lowe's plants that, and if I went to Boca and if I went to, where you are, Cathy, in the Bay Area, the same builder grade
you will find azaleas in every corner of Florida. And now here's the thing, though, that we talk about how bad it is, and that's a given, right? These lawns are horrible for the environment. They're horrible for our, at the risk of sounding woohoo, inner peace. We don't have any quiet, but also it kills me. People will slave, maybe not the best word. They will toil over these lawns. They will pour money and water and resources into them. And then these same people will get into their camper and go camp in a state park and go, God, this is beautiful. Or they will take a tour of the botanical gardens. And it somehow we need to get the message that this isn't, when you live in Florida, those places aren't places you can visit. Those are places you can create.
Absolutely.
I have only seen hummingbirds in my neighborhood, my life, actually, in a place where I was living twice. And they were both, one was coming to the fire bush. They pass through every fall in our area. And one was coming, we had a caterpillar experiment that got a little out of control. And it was feeding on the milkweed. And I honestly don't know if the milkweed was native, but that's milkweeds and monarchs. That's a whole other cycle you get into where you never have enough milkweed, because if you plant more milkweed, you get more caterpillars and they eat all the milkweed, and you feel like you have to buy more milkweed, and then you get even more caterpillars, and it's very stressful. But butterflies, we have beautiful black snakes. We've got all kinds of frogs. We have several types of anoles and geckos, and it's we get some birds. We have woodpeckers, and I mean, it's really nice. I can sit in my front yard and I can watch this all happen, and it's really no different than being in a botanical garden, other than
and it's
out my window.
noticeable.
Can I hop in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you say, because Cathy, I think that said something so interesting. I just wanted to amplify that we don't have to go out to these places, that we could actually have them in our yard. And I think it's sort of a more radical idea than I think we might even figure. And that sort of came across to me when several years ago now, when I was planting beautyberry out in my front yard, and a neighbor of mine came over, and she was curious, and she was sort of perplexed that I was planting that. She said, isn't that what you see growing out, like in these places, like when you walk out, when you go out to, like, because I've been hiking in places and I've seen those. And I said, yeah, it is. And I think first of all, she's a Spanish speaker. Spanish was, is just, and her English is just a little better than my Spanish. But what really came across to me during the conversation that we had was that, it just seemed like a garden for her was different, meant something different than a garden for me meant. And I think that we're asking for is to really have people, to sort of think again about what really is a garden, and what should we have, what should we be planting in our own yard.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of a leap for her to imagine that I would want to plant something that could just grow out there.
Yeah.
But why would you plant something that didn't take work? Yeah. Well, that was my mom. My mom and dad, we moved to Florida in 1980, and we had, as so many people did, the pebble lawns. I don't know if you're a recent arrival to Florida, you probably haven't seen these. As a child who had to weed them, they're hideous. But we had finally gotten to the point my parents saved their money and we put in sod. And now my mother, who's 75, she got an oak tree from a tree giveaway. And she's out there every year raking the oak leaves off the sod, which is really not sod anymore. It's been transformed by, and I say to her every year, just let them sit there. That's like the best thing you can do if you're going to have grass is don't rake it. And it's something, there's a sense of purpose, I think, with lawns, with turf grass, with that type of lawn. It's, as you say, that you arrived, and certainly generationally, I think we're starting to think more now about maybe we need to live in harmony with the planet. I'm giving a talk tonight about Florida springs, and we talk about how springs are formed, and we talk about, well, what are the challenges facing springs? And the slide that comes up when I say that is just a green patch of lawn. The more we experience Florida, the more we realize we have the ability to create a better Florida, but we also have the power, unfortunately, to really chip away at what brought us here in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's it's important. And I know native plants are hard though, Chad. I mean, sometimes some areas, and I like the native plant people, but sometimes they can get a little reputation.
They're zealous. Yeah. I mean, native plant people are native plant people. I mean, it's like CrossFit people, everyone run across someone who's like really into CrossFit or vegan, where like, they're like, I mean, it's evangelical in a lot of.
I have a story about this too. Just as chance would have it, just a couple of days ago, my local chapter, the Native Plant Society, they we do fall tours of yards, and every once in a while, they'll ask me if I'm willing to have my yard toured, and I'll say yes. But then they always they have to set up a meeting to come out to inspect it. Then just a couple of days, and it's always puts me on the defensive because I have some things that aren't native as well. Some ferns. I have some suspicious ferns out there, and and then but just a couple of days ago, they came out and they didn't really want to talk to me. They want. And I can imagine them walking around sort of inspecting these things and seeing all these horrible things.
Got your magnifying glass and your little identification book. Yeah.
And I used to be, as I said, a little more radical. Like if you were in my neighborhood and I saw you planting a Chinese hibiscus or something, you were dead to me, But so there is a little bit of that, and I think maybe we should try to ease up a little bit on that. So
no question,
urge people to maybe just start to plant some natives and to incorporate them with some other things. Because again, I said the ferns, but I have a couple frangipanges that they're invasive, but they're beautiful, and I'm also going to cut them down, and that's okay. I think we need to. tell
Right.
people.
As a member of my chapter, the Native Plant Society, I am always trying to build bridges and extend that invitation to raise an awareness. And hey, if someone's got 0 and I can get them to 50% of their land, that's a huge, huge win. And let's face it, most people are at 0. So if I get them to put in a black-eyed Susan or a passion vine or something kind of weird and crazy that they wouldn't otherwise have, porterweed, I've won. This is not an all or nothing scenario. What I love for there to be, let's outlaw the, import and sale of non-native plants. Well, that'd be one that's never going to happen. What I want to do is try and raise awareness that, hey, these native plants will bring life to your landscape. They will support the ecology. They will bring butterflies and birds, and you can watch it evolve through seasons. And it's so much fun to notice that and have this little kind of science experiment in your own yard. And then you learn more about it and you get more into it. And maybe that becomes some level of community activism where you ask your county to stop mowing so much, or you plant a little garden somewhere for somewhere else, or you pass this information along. And that's really what I think a lot of the native plant groups and a lot of these advocacy for native plant groups are trying to do, is just bring an awareness that, hey, you've got a choice. Okay, you want to put in asparagus fern that is a terrible invasive, or would you rather plant like a some sort of dwarf hibernum that's going to look even better and be great for the pollinators? I think in any walk of life, when you're trying to change people's mind on something, the full-on evangelical, hard sell Latin names, that is really off-putting to people. And God bless that. We need them too. But when it comes to moving big numbers of people towards a different way of thinking about yards and landscapes like we're talking about, we've got to do it going easy and make it fun and make it approachable. And I think the simplest way to make it approachable is with butterflies, because everyone loves butterflies. Everyone loves pollinators. I think that idea of pollinator collapse has kind of caught on, and that, if we don't have all these things, buzzing around and sharing pollen, we're in real trouble. That's what I've found is the best way to convert people to native plants. I've never had someone say, well, I'm anti-butterfly.
But they'll tell you they're anti-bee. I mean, we have some neighbors who, I think we talked about this the last time. We had just had an issue with a beehive that was formed as they moved, and the neighbors were furious with us because we wouldn't move it. And when my husband says, well, where do you think the bees live? Where do you think bees go? You have to have them. But I mean, the pollinators is good. That the wildlife is amazing to me. And the difference in growing up in an area where everybody had grass and all these things, and then coming the city I live in, there's actually quite a few yards that are at least xeriscaped. There's probably less turf grass in Gulfport that percentage wise than say St. Petersburg or Tampa. We're a little,
we make up
different.
for you in Jacksonville, I can assure you.
Well, thank you. But I mean, it's so, I mean, there's a lot of discussions with gardening, and people like that. They like, once they realize it's not too hard to start doing that. Or if they don't feel like it's an all or nothing approach. I think they enjoy it. We have a guy down the street from us who, he's a great guy. He does little impromptu beekeeping classes. He makes a little allergy potion. One day we walked by his house. I'm like, what you do? He's like, I'm planting mushrooms. I'm going to grow mushrooms. I'm trying to figure out how. I mean, so we have a lot of that. And once people realize that the actual nature of Florida can be accessible in your yard, I think that's, and Andrew, in your book, Bitten, I think you really talk about, you went a little nuts with some stuff. You got a little hardcore there.
One plant that I was thinking of with that Chad, when Chad was mentioning the butterflies, and this plant probably doesn't grow up where Chad is, but the Kunti plant.
Oh yeah, Kunti
will
grow pretty much everywhere in Florida.
You have it up there too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing plant, and it's the only host plant for the Atala butterfly. Which I don't know exactly what the Atala's status is right now, but it's a gorgeous little black butterfly with some orange and blue accents. And so, and it's one of those amazing things. You plant a few of those and boom, you got the butterfly. It's amazing how you find them. So that's just, so I agree wholeheartedly with what Chad said about sort of, getting people into the plants by the related pollinators, but including butterflies, but also hummingbirds and other birds.
Absolutely. And what really I think tuned me into this is thinking about, some of these huge problems with climate change, biodiversity collapse, pollinator. What can you do? Well, you can start in your yard and you can plant native. That's sort of where I began. And I was like, you know what? I've got English ivy growing all along the side of my house. And what I did, I just got a shovel and started with a 5 by 5 foot patch and put some seed down. And the more I learned, the more I pulled up. And then I put some more down. And then I tried this and that didn't work. So I tried something else. And then I joined the Native Plant Society because I wanted to learn more, and kind of one thing led to the next. But if you're looking for, and again, you can't do more than the Department of the Interior or Fish and Wildlife or those organizations can do to save the planet, so to speak. But even if you plant a little planter box, the bees and the butterflies will find it, and they'll find it fast. You will be astonished how quickly they will find that stuff. You won't see a bird in your yard for months if you've got lawn. And then the second you put in a native plant, all of a sudden there's this activity around it. And that's really what helped inspire me is, I took it slow, step by step to the extent I was able to. And I did a lot of it during lockdown, and I had all this free time to do landscaping and lawn care. And now I've got Gulf fritillary caterpillars this morning on my passion vine. I had a plover on my sidewalk. And because I've got bugs here, and it came off the beach to get my bugs. I've got wrens nesting and all kinds of things taking place around me because I put these plants in, and these plants, they're food and they're shelter. And that's what these animals need to survive and do not have enough of in our suburban, urban landscapes.
Yeah, one of the more gratifying planting experiences I've had was a vine that I planted on my oak trees. Has a terrible name. It's called chicory grape is the common name for it. But they do produce these amazing flowers the butterflies enjoy, but also then the flowers turn into these white berries, which are really pretty. But I have a nest box for the woodpeckers, and I see it right now. This is happening. That's why I'm observing it. The woodpeckers, they have it pretty easy, actually. Just go up and they take the berries. I never knew that they would actually eat them, but apparently they do. And they've been feeding their young in the nest box on the oak tree from these berries. They do it all season. And so, yeah, it's amazing to see that whole life cycle taking place.
It's really gratifying to watch a landscape like that come to fruition, and seasonally this comes up and then it comes back and it blooms. And I think that's one of the reasons, people like the ornamental decorative plants, is because they just stick them in the ground and they look the same year round. They don't really grow. They don't really change color. Native plants die.
They do stuff.
Right, exactly. They do stuff. So they are not going to look the same all year round. They need some maintenance and some trimming, but the rewards are so great in terms of the species they bring in, the life they support. I go out every morning and my landscape is different. I'm going to see a different bird. I'm going to see a different insect, a different butterfly, a different bloom. Something's coming up. I don't know where these things come from. And you'll be surprised if you take that turf out of your landscape, what just happens that you don't plant, because there is a seed bank there and things are going to blow in off the breeze that you'll not plant. And, a year later is going to come up and it's like, oh my God, wow. You get your little phone app out and you take a picture of it. And what is this thing? And, it's really an interactive experience for me as I go through, and I've got a small area here. It's, 5 feet by 50 feet long. I'm not talking about an acre and a half or something like that. So even in small spaces, you can really get a lot of the enjoyment from native plants when you start putting them in.
Well, you
When you're
have to be
talking about,
careful with native plants, though, because you get those native plants and you get the birds, you get the bird
yeah.
droppings, and they make non-native.
Oh,
This had,
brother.
we get the non-native. The other day, I was looking out my front window, and we have a bird. We have a platform bird feeder and a hanging bird feeder. One's for the squirrels, one's for the birds,
Mhm.
and they know the difference. And I look out there, and I'm
They're
looking like,
labeled.
is that a yellow squash? And sure enough, about 2 feet away from the one that fed the birds, we had a squash vine grow. I'm like, well, how the hell did that get there? And it really, I wasn't even thinking about birds. I'm like, well, what could we possibly, did we throw, I mean, something get out of my compost bin? And then somebody said, well, maybe a bird, you know, shit in your yard.
Mhm.
Like,
Basically.
oh, well, that makes sense. Yes, the bird left it. So we had a beautiful vine until something ate all the leaves, and then the squash died. So we didn't harvest it. But it's a self-fulfilling thing too.
Yeah.
The more you attract those things, the more you want to do, and the
Mhm.
more it grows. And
Yeah, and the
I
more
can't
interesting
yeah.
it is. One thing that Chad said caught my attention about when Chad's mentioning all the stuff that just that things that happen with the native plants, and it makes me think that I think part of what we tend to focus on, I think we're so visual, right, as a species, and it's really the flowers. Is what we tend to be, I think, so focused on just flowers.
Mhm.
When you start getting more into native plants and gardening for them, you start to appreciate other aspects of the plants, like just the foliage. I mean, one of my native plants right now is the Jamaican caper, because it has just a beautiful green, glossy leaf. But we tend not to appreciate the leaves as much. But I think once we start
Yeah.
appreciating the other elements, and then they have a seed. I mean, the seeds open up these, like, it's a true caper, actually, the Jamaican caper, but it has like a seed pod that will open up, and then inside the seed pod is like really bright orange, and then it has seeds that kind of are exposed.
Mhm.
So all these sort of elements beyond just
Yeah.
the flowers
Right.
are pretty amazing about plants, and even and the smell, like white stopper. The stoppers are something that's very popular. That's stop. There's all sorts of different kinds of stoppers, and the leaves have these amazing smells. And to me, the white stopper smell, some people actually don't like it because it has almost a skunky smell, but but that to me smells like my part of Florida.
Yeah.
That kind of, I feel like I'm in. So I think we need to start appreciating not just the blossoms, but all the other elements that Chad is alluding to.
Sure. And they tie you to place. Again, what we love
Yeah.
about Florida is Florida, and it's
Yeah.
supposed to look like Florida, not some other part of Tennessee or Massachusetts or, I love hydrangeas, and the big, purple hydrangeas that you see on Cape Cod. I think those are great, but they belong on Cape Cod, not in, not on Amelia Island, Florida. And there is, the Coreopsis here, the state wildflower. There are so many species that are specific to Florida that are beautiful and will thrive here if people give them a chance. And it really does tie you to a specific place. Imagine Florida without the oak tree and without the Spanish moss. I mean, how, or the pine scrub, or the cabbage palm that you mentioned. All of the trees, plants. Those are all native to here. They belong here. They have given so much of the state this unique aesthetic that we've run away from.
Yeah.
To make everything look tropical, or like it's supposed to be at some Miami Beach hotel, and that tropical feel, that Caribbean feel, exotic. It's nice, it's great. We kind of all romanticize that aesthetic, but there's an old school Florida aesthetic too that if you give a chance, you will be blown away by. And that's what I tell people is, like, you got to be patient. You don't put these in the ground and then 3 weeks, they're not annuals, they're not begonias. This is not an instant sort of feedback loop of positive. But when it happens, you'll have your mind blown. You will be blown away by what you see, and the diversity of life, and the color, and the vibrancy, and the caterpillars, and the butterflies, and the birds, and you'll just be blown away.
So I could not agree more. It is it's a whole different Florida when you do that. Before we go, I want to ask you each, what is your understanding? We all live in 3 very different areas of Florida. What's your favorite plant for your landscape? What's your favorite thing? Andrew will let you, no pressure.
Well, since I already mentioned firebush, I'll move on to a different one. And this might satisfy people who are all into the blossoms. It's probably the Geiger tree. The Geiger tree, just because it has so many interesting resonances culturally, it has beautiful orange flowers. There's a little bit of a controversy whether it's actually a native or not. Audubon saw the tree in the Keys in the backyard of Captain Geiger, where he was staying when he toured Florida for his book, for his Birds of America book. So that's how it got the name of the Geiger tree. And then he actually painted his white crowned pigeon on the Geiger blossom. So if you look up the white crowned pigeon on Google under Audubon, you see his print. You'll see that's the Geiger tree, and it just has beautiful orange blossoms, and it attracts all sorts of bugs. It has its own kind of beetle that it attracts, which attracts different birds. And I noticed that spot-breasted orioles, which are gorgeous orioles, really enjoy like the insects and the flowers there. So the Geiger tree is probably my favorite right now, and I have one tree in my backyard that's just doing great. So that's a beautiful one for the people who complain that the native plants don't have beautiful flowers.
Well, that's patently not true.
Yeah.
I'm going to give people two. One's an easy one that you can find anywhere and people are comfortable with, and that's black-eyed Susan. Everyone loves black-eyed Susan. It's got this beautiful yellow bloom. It grows in most and even in harsh conditions. It grows all over the state. It's a great plant for native wildlife, and you can find it readily available even at a lot of big box hardware stores, those kind of places. The other one is what I mentioned before, and is passion flower. That is the host plant for the state butterfly, which is the zebra longwing, which is, if anyone's seen a zebra longwing, I'm sure you both have. It's that yellow butterfly with the black zebra stripe. It is just the most extraordinary Garden of Eden, Dr. Seuss sort of butterfly you've ever seen. And it's purple bloom when you get this passion flower bloom on it. It defies description. It almost looks cosmic in how tendril and purple and intricate and delicate it is. And these things grow all over the place and are just a wonderful pollinator and specimen plant. You can train them to grow up trellises and trees in your stair rail and things like that. So that is my favorite, and one that I was able to, now don't tell anyone I did this, but I go along to some of the construction sites here in town where they're about to bulldoze everything, and I will purloin some of the native plants out of there and take them back into my yard. And I got a bunch of passion flower last year, and they're really thriving, and that's what the Gulf Friddle area are on right now.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite is one neither of you mentioned. I was surprised. Jasmine.
Okay.
And now I'm wondering if jasmine perhaps is not native.
Well, I don't think it's native, but
I believe
you can still like it, Cathy. It's okay.
Yeah. Confederate jasmine is not native. I'm pretty sure about that. I believe there is a jasmine that is native. Mm-hmm. The chances of you having that one are not great, but that's an opportunity for a learning experience, right?
Yeah. Are you talking about the coral jasmine?
You mean honeysuckle? There's coral honeysuckle. Jasmine.
I am talking. It's like okay. It doesn't
flower.
The one that I like the smell of is white flower, but I was thinking of the yellow.
Okay.
Maybe I'm okay. Well, it's I do have a jasmine ground cover on my right of way, but I know that's not native. But I like all the flowers that we have. I think it's muley grass. Is that the one that has the purple?
Yeah.
Soft purple. That's I always get so upset when people say Florida doesn't have seasons. I'm like, yeah, you can tell it's fall in Florida because the grass turns purple. What are you talking about? But I do. What would you suggest, both of you? What would you suggest for people who maybe aren't quite sure how to go about it, maybe aren't committed to ripping out everything, but how do you start making your own Florida landscape spectacular? How do you start making it friendlier? How do you start drawing these birds? What would you
I'll go ahead and start,
take that
Andrew, and
first
just
shot.
give
Go
a
ahead.
shameless plug to the Florida Native Plant Society. There are native plant groups in every corner of this state. And, it's like, well, how do I start losing weight? How do I start working out? Well, maybe talk to someone who's a professional, or who has, done that, or talk to a trainer, or talk to a dietitian. And that's what I would recommend. If you don't want to go through a ton of trial and error and spend a bunch of money buying plants that turn out not to be native, that aren't right for your landscape, join your native plant society. It's $30 a year if you can manage it, and learn and talk to them, and become involved with local gardening groups. I mean, there is a huge, you're not in this alone. Okay. There is a great big network out there of native plant groups and gardeners, and start small. Again, you don't have to tear out your entire landscape at a cost of $50,000 and put all native plant. Start small and start learning about what you like and what will work for you, but just start. And the best way to start is to look up the Florida Native Plant Society or a local gardening group and talk to people.
And then related to that, I would say to look for a native plant nursery. Just do a Google search and find a native plant nursery near you. And then you just visit that nursery and you look around and you talk to the nursery. You have to be careful not to take up too much of their time. If but if they're not too busy, they'll be happy to talk to you about certain plants that do well in a certain part of your yard, depending on how much you have, and they'd love to talk.
Yeah, and if you find
nursery, is a way to go, and just look around and see what you like, and then ask them about it, and that's how you dip your toe in the water.
Sure. If you find, I think FANN, Florida Association of Native Nurseries, is the website you can go to see if there's one near you. There may not be, because native plant nurseries are rare. But if you find a native plant person, this is what Cathy found. Boy, they like talking about them.
I noticed that with you, Chad. I will say in a lot of nurseries, it depends. The more you get away from the big box stores, the more knowledge they have. I mean, we certainly have tropical nurseries that aren't great, but we have one in our area, Wilcox, and it's about a 30-minute drive from me. And not everything they sell is native, but I can tell you that every employee I've ever talked to there can tell you which ones are native and whether they think it'll work. So, I mean, you don't need to find exclusively native nurseries. What's nice to find is somebody who's smart.
A lot of times there's a University of Florida Extension office to help primarily farmers and agriculture, but you can call those folks as well, and they'll help you with, is this a native plant? Is it an invasive? So there are a lot of resources available for you if you are interested in trying to do this, and just start small. And once you do, you will reap the benefits. And I'm very confident that, if I can give people a taste of that, they'll gobble it down.
Yep.
Well, those will all be in the show notes.
Great.
So we're going to put everything in there, as well as links to both of you. I have the Florida Native Plant Society in there. I have the link to the extension services. We're going to have all that. And of course, you can always reach out to me if you have questions, and I'll try and route your question to somebody who can help. The Florida Native Plant Society, I should add, Chad, has a wonderful group, and you don't have to be a member, where you can go and ask questions.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very helpful community if you go on Facebook.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you both for being here today, because this has been a lot of fun. I wish we could only talk about plants, but it's clear I'm outclassed by both of you. And we're doing some back-to-back recording this week, so we do have to say goodbye. But Andrew, I hope to have you on the podcast again soon. I've been reading Goldens Are Here since we spoke last. I'm enjoying it. It's a little
it's about non-native plants, right? Citrus.
It's about citrus. It's also got some other themes in it, and we're linking to that book as well in the show notes. Thanks for being today.
Fantastic.
Chad's my producer. I get to see his smiling face every week, but it's rare that other people get to hear him. So
thank you.
Thank you, Chad, for stepping out from behind the glass and talking to us today.